Welcome to Direct Talk, interviews with leaders, visionaries, and pioneers who are shaping Asia and the rest of the world. Elif Shafak is the most widely read female author in Turkey, whose books have been translated into 49 languages. Her writing is rooted in reality but laced with magic realism. Her books explore identity, language, and gender. She is not afraid of controversy. In 2006, she was prosecuted in Turkey for her best-selling novel, The Bastard of Istanbul. Its subject matter was the Armenian genocide. The deaths of over 1 million people at the hands of Imperial Turkey is still denied by modern Turkish governments.
When the book was published, I was expecting some reaction from ultranationalists, but I was never expecting this kind of bitter, hostile reaction, which was all over the media, accusing me of being a traitor. I was sued, I was prosecuted. It went on for a year. It was tough because I was pregnant at the time, and there were like mobs or groups, I should say, ultranationalists spitting at my pictures. That part was very unsettling for me. And after I was acquitted, even then I had to live with a bodyguard for a year. And the whole thing was also quite surreal because for the first time, a work of fiction was accused of insulting Turkishness under Article 301, even though nobody knows what that means because it's so vague. What on earth, is insulting Turkishness? You can interpret and misinterpret that whichever way you want. And as a result, my Turkish lawyer in the courtroom had to defend my Armenian fictional characters because the words of fictional characters had been plucked out of the text and used as evidence against me. While this was happening, from the society, from the readers, particularly from women readers of all backgrounds, of all ages, I had an amazing positive feedback. Among them there were Turks, Kurds, Armenians, Greeks, Jews, Alevis, women of all backgrounds. And that, to me, was very important. There should have been many more novels in Turkish literature dealing with this issue because it is a massive tragedy. And there's no way we can grow up as a society if we cannot talk about it.
Elif Shafak was born in Strasbourg in 1971, daughter of a female diplomat. After her parents divorced, she was brought up by her mother and grandmother living in Spain, Jordan, and Turkey.
In a way, I grew up in a very dysfunctional, broken family. And what left a big impact on me, I think, was the solidarity I've seen between these two women. And maybe it made me more gender conscious. I observed the difficulties that my mother went through. I was very much aware that this was a very patriarchal, very sexist, and very homophobic society. And I started questioning these issues at an early age. Maybe the whole experience made me feel a bit like an insider-outsider. I've always felt like an insider-outsider in my motherland. That's why I'm a big believer in sisterhood. I think this is the kind of sisterhood that needs to go beyond political divisions, beyond ideological divisions, and unite women from different backgrounds. If we can do that, we can change the system. But when women are divided, I think the only thing that benefits from this is patriarchy itself.
In her 2017 novel, Three Daughters of Eve, written in English, Shafak developed further her thoughts on sisterhood, focusing on 3 Muslim women at Oxford University who call themselves the sinner, the believer, and the confused.
It is possible to see the story in 2 ways. The first question is, we have an atheist, we have a believer, we have a confused. Can they still be friends? Can they still be sisters? Just like my mother and grandmother were able to develop a sisterhood, can there still be a sisterhood among women with completely different worldviews? That was the first thing I wanted to question. But secondly, I think it's also possible to think of these girls as the stages one person can go through his or her own life. So there are moments in our lives when we're closer to the sinner. There are seasons in our lives when we were closer to the believer or to the confused. And that is the beauty of it. I think one's inner journey goes through many, many seasons, and I respect that diversity rather than trying to reduce it to one single identity. I like the endlessness of the journey, of the quest, and everyone's journey is different.
Shafak's 2010 novel, The 40 Rules of Love, an all-time bestseller in Turkey, looked at the concept of love from a spiritual angle.
I really felt like by the time I finished the book, I had changed a lot inside me, the energy, the balance, whatever you call it, because the book made me think and maybe ask questions that matter, that are timeless, that are almost placeless. And these are questions that must be raised about faith, about our quest in this world. You might start as a Sufi, end up as an atheist. You might start as an agnostic, end up as a Christian mystic. Who on earth can judge that? You know, everyone's inner journey is unique, just like our fingerprints. No one can judge that. So to me, that heterodox quest was very interesting. To be honest, what I don't like, and I question this a lot, is certainty. For me, many people who are very certain of their religious beliefs, I think they're trying to get rid of doubt. And that's very dangerous, because faith without doubt is a dogma, and dogmas are dangerous. On the other hand, many people who are very sure of their atheism want to get rid of faith. However, in life, I think what's interesting is the dance of faith and doubt. And so I've always felt closer to agnostics or to mystics who were also misfits, you know, who are walking a very fine line between faith and doubt, sometimes falling on this side, sometimes falling on that side. That gray area where there's room for spirituality, but no collective identities.
Istanbul has always been a central part of Shafak's writing. Uniquely situated, half in Europe and half in Asia, half in the East and half in the West, she's described Istanbul as a liquid place.
We tend to take it for granted that there is an East and there is a West, and they're completely different in their history or the fabric of their societies. But these are oftentimes mental categories that we take for granted and then stop questioning. I don't think there's a monolithic East versus monolithic West. And anyone who spends enough time in Istanbul will know what I'm talking about, because this is a city in which everything is constantly mixed and there's a new synthesis. The boundaries of East and West are much more permeable than we tend to assume. Also, I criticize the view that the East is usually seen as a liquid land and the West is regarded as a solid land that is more safe and steady. That is also a mental category, duality, which is wrong. And I think now we know that we're all living in liquid times. What can happen in another part of the world can affect what's happening in some other part. What has been happening in Turkey can happen in the West as well.
Since 2002, Turkey has mainly been run by the Justice and Development Party, led by Recep Erdogan, who is also president. Under the recent 2-year-long state of emergency, 77,000 people were arrested.
I think it's completely unacceptable and heartbreaking that Turkey today has become the world's biggest jailer of journalists, surpassing even China's sad record. It has become a country in which words feel very heavy. I think all Turkish writers, poets, journalists, academics today know that because of something you have written, because of a poem, because of an article, because of something you say in an interview or a tweet, even a retweet, in one day you can get into trouble. In one day you can be called a traitor by all pro-government papers, and most of the media in Turkey today is pro-government. You can be prosecuted, exiled, arrested, almost lynched on social media by trolls. And Turkey also tells us, in my opinion, that for a democracy to exist and to thrive, the ballot box in itself is not enough. In addition to the ballot box, you need to have rule of law. You need to have separation of powers, definitely a free, diverse media, an independent academia, women's rights, minority rights, LGBT rights. Together with all those components, we have a breathing democracy. What we had in Turkey was primarily the ballot box. And over time, all those other institutions have been damaged, broken, or bruised. Now, once majoritarianism settles in, from there to authoritarianism, it's a very short slide, and that is where we have ended up today.
Elif Shafak now lives with her 2 children in London, a city where over 250 languages are spoken.
I believe diversity is essential for a thriving democracy and for people to learn from each other. Unfortunately, today we see the rise of tribalism, both east and west, everywhere, country after country. There are populist demagogues telling us that we will be safer if we retreat into spaces based on sameness. And that is an illusion. If we're surrounded by sameness, we're not going to be safer necessarily. But that's what they're trying to sell us. They say if we build bigger walls, close our doors, lock our doors, and if we're surrounded by people who look like us, speak like us, vote like us, life is going to be okay. Even in America today, I think we see the risk of time moving backwards when it comes to abortion rights, when it comes to same-sex marriage, and many other individual freedoms that we thought we had achieved over time, or the generations before us had achieved, can be taken away from us.
Elif Shafak is known as a political commentator, writing for major international newspapers and periodicals. But for her, the role of literature in public debate is unique.
I think literature can contribute so much because our job as writers is to add nuances into the discussion. And when you read the works of people who have survived holocausts, genocides, horrible tragedies, interestingly, they all say the same thing. They say the opposite of kindness is not necessarily evil. The opposite of goodness is not necessarily evil. It is numbness. It's indifference. When we become indifferent to the pain of other people, I think today all kinds of racism, sexism, ultranationalism operates by turning the other into someone inferior. In other words, by dehumanizing the other. Yeah? Once you do that, you can do anything to other people. What literature does is to rehumanize the other by telling the stories, just reminding us of our common humanity. So in a way, I think literature is an act of resistance today more than ever.
In 2018, Shafak was invited to Norway to become the 4th author to contribute to a project called Future Library. She donated a manuscript which won't be printed and available to read until the year 2114.
I was very happy and very honored to take part in the Future Library. I wrote a manuscript called The Last Taboo, and it will be opened and read 100 years later. What kind of a world will it be? When you write something like this, when you take part in such a project, you have to think about the future. What kind of a world is it going to be? Is it going to move towards the direction of tribalism, nationalism, isolationism, animosity, or is it going to become more and more, hopefully interconnected in a more egalitarian way? I think stories connect us through invisible threads, and as humanity, we are interconnected anyhow. It's just a matter of being aware of those connections. But I believe there is a big difference between the language of politics and the language of literature. For politics, there's always a distinction between us and them. There's an other, and there has to be another. Whereas in the world of literature and storytelling, there's no other. The other is me. I'm part of the other. So nobody's excluded.